Jane, would you? There we go. Right. Welcome,
Sorry,
everybody.
recording, sorry.
Thank you. Well, happy Friday. It's gorgeous out. We have a lot to discuss today. This is the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council meeting on June 4th. So it looks like we have, I think most of our members and many more folks. Catherine, do you want to introduce some of the new folks that are on from ECCD?
Sure, we're happy to be joined by two folks who I will let introduce themselves.
I think I know most everybody here, but my name is Chris Cochran. I'm the Director of Community Planning and Revitalization. I work for the Department of Housing and Community Development, which is part of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And we run a lot of the smart growth designation programs that kind of focus on creating vibrant, walkable communities. I can go on more and tell you about that, but I know you don't have a lot of time, but hello, glad to be here.
Hi, I'm Jake. I work with Chris in Community Planning and Revitalization. I'm a planning policy manager there and help manage some of the designation programs and grants and all types of things.
I see Jane's note in the chat. We won't make you do it this time, but we do set aside time on the agenda for extended introductions where people can tell us a little bit more about themselves. So we'll put you on the hook for next time.
Yeah, I've got a video that does that. It's awesome. Yeah.
We will we'll also add you to the official list members. So we do have a couple of minutes, although I think we've heard from everybody in terms of extended instructions, but is there anybody on the subcommittee that would like to take a moment to tell us a little bit about themselves we have not heard from? I think we've heard from everybody.
I know everybody, I know every square, but Mike, I do not know you. I don't think I do.
Hi, Chris. Nice to meet you. I lead operations for Green Mountain Power, deal with climate change almost every day now. So that's why I'm here, happy to be here and hope to solve some problems.
That explains your background. I got it.
Yes.
If it's all right with everybody, I think we can move into subcommittee liaison and member updates. So why don't we start with subcommittee liaison updates? I don't see Jay for our science and technology subcommittee, but we'll open it up to Chad first.
Sure. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Last week's cross-sector subcommittee doing a lot of the similar things we're doing here, breaking out the various task groups. I did volunteer to support Liz Miller and Ed McNamara on the energy task group. And so, yeah, I'm building out this massive spreadsheet that has all of the different, all the different buckets and all the different avenues for mitigation and the emission benefits thereof. So it's going to be a pretty exciting next several weeks on that subcommittee as that gigantic spreadsheet starts to be populated, similar to what we're doing here. Jane, anything else? I don't have my notes right in front of me. I have my hand notes.
Just for folks that are interested, this next week they meet again, and that'll be the first presentation out of the top bucket strategies coming out of their task groups. And so they have broken up into 4 task groups based on sectoral work. So transportation, non-energy emissions, buildings and thermal, and electricity energy. And so next week, the presentations will be on transportation and non-energy emissions. And so very high level, what they've been doing in their task groups. And then the following 2 weeks later will be the other 2, electricity and buildings. And then they'll be working as a subcommittee to put together that package that'll go to the full council in July from that. Yeah, and also next, the big thing for them is that the business as usual model. So a model like that looks at where we would get with emissions reductions if the policies and programs that are in place stayed the same is done now, and that will be unveiled sort of in depth at the next cross-sector meeting, as well as science and data.
Great. Are there any other updates from our members that you'd like to share?
I don't know if there's anybody here from Just Transitions, but if not, since that's so relevant to all the other subcommittees, I'd happily tell you where they are.
Yeah, that would be
everything.
great. That was my question, is where we're at with the principles. And
Yeah, so they sort of, as I think you've heard, or many of you might have heard, they had a draft guiding principles document that also has definitions for, especially focused on frontline and impacted communities, and then a series of like actionable questions that start to get at what an equity assessment would be. That was drafted as of like getting really close a week ago. They sort of finalized the draft last night with comments and input from the subcommittee, and then congealed around what the process would look like for unveiling that to the other subcommittees, as well as guiding the other subcommittees through a process of application. So there's sort of two main next steps: a process for collecting and receiving edits and inputs from the subcommittee and council on that document, and then another process about sort of the tutorial on how you use it to inform your strategies and recommendations. And they coalesced around the idea of having, rather than like coming to all the subcommittees, they're going to have one workshop that they invite subcommittees into, so that the full Just Transition subcommittee and all the expertise that helped inform that document would be around the table to also answer questions and inform the learning of other subcommittees and council members. And that'll also be recorded, so that if a subcommittee member can't be there, they can watch it after. And then the liaisons with all the subcommittees will be responsible in sort of holding the hands of subcommittees through implementation of it. But we're going to talk about that in more detail, as well as the draft document with the steering committee on this coming Monday's meeting, which I sent to all of you earlier today, that has an agenda and links to all of the documents that I just referred to. So no need to wait. It's going to come in a package to all of you with a cover memo and some thoughtful questions. But if you're dying to see what it looks like now, the most up-to-date version was on that email I sent earlier today. But really, really good work there. I think that the challenge next is how to take in substantive feedback, not like wordsmithing, but I suspect it'll be, a challenging document for some people to receive and understand how to apply. And so they're thinking a lot about how to incorporate feedback in that. And then of course, how you weight that with everything else you have to weight when you're prioritizing strategies, like cost and, benefit, return on investment, cost of inaction. So I think that'll be what subcommittees are waiting on understanding. So great progress. So.
Thanks. I think the only other member update actually I have, and was reminded when Marion Walls signed on, I would like to congratulate James for stealing one of my best planners. But the Global Warming Solutions Act program at ANR is very lucky to be getting the wonderful resource of Marion Walls, who was an emergency management planner at VEM and has a really strong planning background as the new Global Warming Solutions Act coordinator. So sorry to steal your thunder, Jane, but
I really am so glad that you brought that up, Erica, and thank you for doing that so graciously and wonderful. And so, yeah, we're so excited to have Marianne stepping on board. And I really think that while I can't imagine how to replace her for Erica within emergency management, I hope that as we start to think about capacity, you all will know that, Marianne, and Marianne can speak to this as she's here, but we're thinking a lot about sort of really coordinated staff support to help you all, to take you from your strategies and your recommendations all the way into drafting for the climate action plan. And Marianne obviously brings a ton of expertise with your body of work. And so I suspect that she will be here full on to support you all in the coming months and really support through drafting of the climate action plan. So, and just so Marianne knows, the joke has become within ANR that, I'm in charge of drafting the climate action plan with all of you. Billy Koster's the director of planning for the agency. Neither one of us are planners. So we're like really excited to have a planner coming on board who can help us think about all the components of the climate action plan and what it takes to put it together. So we're psyched that Marianne accepted.
I'm psyched for her.
As
so.
are we.
Well, great. One thing that I skipped right over was reviewing the agenda. So on the agenda for today, we're gonna look at the summer work plan for the subcommittee. And you will have seen something that I sent out earlier this week. We'll be taking a look at the climate action plan strategies template that I will probably toss that over to you, Jane, to go through, which is where a lot of our input will go into. And then we will be revisiting the Municipal Vulnerability Index with Green Mountain Power, as well as the intersections with ANR's work. So we have a lot on the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions or revisions to the agenda? Hearing none. Okay. Can we go into the work plan? We're on time. Let's see if we can stay on time. So earlier this week, I sent you a couple of different things. One was an Excel spreadsheet which was the rural resilience work plan tasks. I'm just going to pull it up here so I can. Would it be helpful for folks if I shared my screen to look at it, or do folks have it handy?
Got it.
I'm going to share it.
Yeah,
And then
everybody-
we can all still look at the
Same
screen
thing.
while we're.
And there
Yeah.
is a link on the agenda for those who want to follow along at home instead.
Let me just make sure I can do this. There we go. Okay, so I'm on two different things here. Let's see if I can move this. Can you still see it? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Oh, okay. So, so this, Catherine and I really felt like we needed to coalesce our committee tasks around and prioritize our committee tasks for the summer, and make it just very, very straightforward and simple and understandable for folks to understand where the direction of the subcommittee is for the next few months, especially as we work towards the deliverable of drafting strategies for the climate action plan. So I'm just going to take you through the spreadsheet, and then I'll just open it up for any questions or discussion about how this is framed. And again, this is
Erica, for me, I'm seeing your schedule and the agenda and not the work plan. I don't know if that's everybody else is having that.
It was there you go.
There you go.
Okay, good. All right. There we go. That better? So the best way to look at this is actually to go to the task groups tab. And first, because what it does is it outlines the tasks that were in our original work plan, and identifies what the objective is, and then what the tasks are to meet that objective and who is responsible for delivering on those tasks. So if you look at objective 1 under CAP recommendations task group, This is really where we have coalesced around building strategies that are meant to go into the climate action plan. This relates back to one of our primary objectives in our original work plan, which was to develop the best practice recommendations. I will note that there is an addition that has been made to this objective, because when you cross-reference the actual objective, which came from the Global Warming Solutions Act, and you cross-reference what our charge is, we needed to integrate expanding the use of nature-based solutions to enhance landscape resilience in the built environment. We didn't have that in our original objective, and actually in our original work plan, we hadn't really accounted for that specific piece of our charge. So we have edited this objective to incorporate that. And then we've developed a number of tasks to be able to get us there. These are very much aligned with the tasks that were in our original work plan. They're just kind of rearranged so that they flow more logically. So refining the cross-sector mitigation recommendations on reducing GHG emissions in rural communities, developing recommendations for fortifying transportation infrastructure, electrical and communications infrastructure, and implementation of storage supported local electrical systems, fortifying other critical community infrastructure, and developing recommendations on how to extend the use of nature-based solutions. Then in the participants column, we have assigned to the task number who is responsible in that task group to develop the outcomes of that task. And so if you look down through, actually I started on, sorry about that. So if you look down through on the CAP recommendations task group, you look through what the outcomes need to be in order to achieve that objective. That's how the tasks have been outlined. And my screen had cut off the top row here, which is the policy and program inventory task group. This task group has actually already been meeting and doing some of this work. It's just now we have transferred the tasks that were again in the original work plan onto this spreadsheet. The objective being reviewing existing planning efforts, including local and regional land use planning, transportation planning, energy planning, and operations planning. And then the participants there, and then the tasks. See, the participants on this one are not broken out into the tasks, because this task group is responsible for all of these tasks.
Erica, just a quick update for Steve and Marion and Stephanie on, I did receive feedback from other utilities that I can package up and get over for that program. The first task group, policy and program inventory. And so that's good news. And the second thing, thinking of Chad and Ann and I on the second, the CAP recommendations, I would think that a lot of the recommendations, in other words, it's a little bit of repetitive. We've got the recommendations that I think a lot of those will come from the existing inventory. So I just wanted to get that out there. I used to feel I was a little more behind, but the fact that I think a lot of those will come out of possibly existing programs is helpful.
Yeah, it is a logical order of the the process that we've developed here, which is really inventorying what we have, doing a gap analysis of what we need, and then making some recommendations to fulfill those gaps. And so task 3 under this task group it probably will flow into the recommendations of the CAP recommendations task group. So we'll have to, that's a good point. We'll have to look at how the flow happens so that we're not duplicating efforts. I don't think we are, because we're all the same people. But it's a matter of if it's a program or policy that is that we see a gap in versus you know, a critical infrastructure sector that needs shoring up for climate change. You know, it could be mutually beneficial depending on what the recommendation is.
Yeah, I would just add, just to build off that a little bit, is, you know, we've done a fair amount of work now assembling all of these various programs and initiatives that are going on. And I was going through it this morning, and really the next step is, and we've asked everybody to identify limitations, which they've done. And so the next logical step is, you know, given a limitation, it's like, what's a strategy to address that limitation? And it just makes me think that, you know, we've had a small working group on this, just like 4 of us. And so when we start talking about strategies, it needs to be more than just us. And maybe even bringing all the people that, and we've had a bunch of people that have provided, like Chris provided stuff, and Rob from A&R and others, and you know, and we may want to somehow bring them all together at one time to sort of go through the list and figure out what are the fixes to some of these limitations, none of which are really awful, by the way. I mean, there's a lot going on, so maybe that, you know, what I would like to be able to do is say we're done the inventory, because I think we're almost done. I'm just waiting for one more person to get back to me. And then we can sort of check that box and move on to, you know, if I think the strategies do get developed as part of task 2, if that's what the next task is, with
Right.
more people. We just need more people involved in that discussion. We've been
And
sort of workhorses gathering all the information.
And I think that's where we want to make sure that they are included on that participants column, so that we're not missing out on in terms of visibility. Unless Joe, you feel like it's already taken care of. So
I'm not sure. Like, I don't understand that.
and if you feel like we need to add some participants to this column, we can do that. This is not a final product. This is meant to be our group product. So if you feel like we're missing some folks on there.
No, I think the folks are fine. I guess the point I'm trying to make is somehow we have to bring more people into the discussion on what the ideas are and strategies are.
Mm-hmm. And you'll see we have that when we look at the work plan part, you'll see we have that teed up for discussion at our next.
Okay.
Meeting. So the timing of that is really good.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the next meeting next Friday, I think it would be a good time to check in more, or we can share more of the details of the inventory and talk about it a little bit more depth, and sort of how we move that into the strategy development stage.
Great. Jane?
Yeah, well, Joe started to actually pick up on one of my questions about this, and I mentioned this to Erica and Catherine a little bit ahead of time. My mind, this is hard for me, and to think about the right flow, but the inventory one is a good example, because I think of like the inventory as this underpinning, but the strategies and recommendations for improving upon programs and policies that exist, it would be impossible for that work group to do that without knowing what the broad overarching strategies are for the subcommittee as a whole, and then the specific recommendations within those strategies to achieve those. So it's hard to know, just because FPR or Forest and Parks and Recreation says there's a problem with this program, we don't know if we want to make a recommendation to enhance that program until we know what the bigger bucket strategies are for the resiliency and adaptation subcommittee.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that sort of gets at my question more around like, well, and maybe I think this all is making sense in some ways, but I wonder maybe it'll be important to also think about like the template that we're going to look at after this too, and if it's the right sort of breakup in order to think about how we're going to get at filling that out. And yeah, I'll you know, because that's like, there's out of Maine for as one example, you know, they had 8 strategies for all of their emergency management, their public health, and community resilience. So the strategies are big.
Yeah.
And you, of course, for you all, or cross-sector mitigation, I think you can probably equate our cross-sector mitigation strategies are probably going to be very similar to the Energy Action Network's pathways right now. So that means probably 3 strategies for transportation. Drive less, electrification of vehicles, and fuel efficiency. So those are the buckets, and then we got to get down. So I'm still trying to figure out how this sort of structure would allow us to arrive at what those big bucket strategies are for resilience and adaptation.
Yeah, and I don't think that the resilience inventory that we're doing is it's down at the tactical level in a lot of ways. These are specific things that we're doing and that everybody's doing in different areas, and we haven't really pulled back yet to think about what are those big buckets that we want to organize this under. And I think that's another exercise we could, I think we all need to be involved with, this whole subcommittee, and maybe others need to be involved with. That actually helps you just laying it out like that. It kind of makes me ready just to call inventory done so we can move on.
I think we need to, why don't we walk through the work plan and the framework that's outlined for the work plan. And because this is definitely up for discussion, because if it doesn't flow logically for us to do task group work and then group those recommendations thematically afterwards, whereas or doing it this way where we develop our main themes and then develop task groups under those themes to develop recommendations with an understanding of where the subcommittee wants to go. It just changes the way that we frame this work and changes the way that we need to make sure that we're also covering the deliverables that are outlined for us in the Global Warming Solutions Act. So let's talk through that. So why don't I quickly change over to the work plan? So this was a format that was developed by Pat Field from CBI, and it really helped, especially Catherine and I, kind of be able to break down the next several meetings and what needs to happen. And what you'll see here is really a repetitive cycle of presentation, feedback, discussion, deliberation, refinement, and then finalization. So when we look at, especially under the CAP recommendations, you'll see that we will have an opportunity to receive a presentation from the task group as a subcommittee, and deliberate on that, and then discuss what revisions or refinements that we want to see. Have the task group go back, make the refinements, and then do a final presentation. So if you look at June 4th, that's today. You'll see that we've outlined some of the subcommittee meeting items that happened today. On the docket for the next meeting would be to look at, under policy and program inventory, would be to have them present on the products of task 1 and 2, which are the inventory, to solicit feedback from the subcommittee, have them do refinements on the inventory based on that feedback. Also on deck would be to, under the CAP recommendations, to come to a consensus on the definition for critical infrastructure. I'm planning on bringing our Homeland Security folks to talk about the definition of critical infrastructure as it stands in Vermont, and ensure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about critical infrastructure in Vermont, because I think we need to make sure that there's a lot of, you can be as broad or as narrow with critical infrastructure as you want to be. And I think we need to be all on the same page. And then engaging, if there's just a note in there that engagement with cross-sector subcommittee for task 1 needs to occur as needed. That's the one that relates to the GHG emissions at municipalities. And it is actually one where we actually aren't going to get to it until the end to allow some time for those recommendations to come out of the cross-sector subcommittee. On June 25th, that starts a 2-week rotation of meetings to allow people to, and task groups, to have a bit more time to meet on the off meeting days and do this work. But you'll see there's under policy and program inventory, receiving a presentation on task 4. So feedback, refinement, under CAP recommendations, receive a presentation on drafts for tasks 2 and 3, which are some of the first recommendations that we would be discussing, evaluate and solicit feedback from the subcommittee. And then it kind of goes on from there into July, when we actually need to, we'll do that cycle a couple more times. And then at the end of July, we will be having had discussed all of the strategies that would have been presented from the task groups. We would decide and group thematically, develop the format, and decide which of those recommendations need to move forward for the climate action plan or not. So that's really what the structure of this is, which is to allow the task groups to do some more detailed analysis and discussion, do the presentation to the subcommittee as a group where we discuss it, and decide whether that's the direction that we want to go in or not, and have a refinement cycle. And so there's the bottom half on the yellow is really an agenda planning where we outline what will actually be on the agenda. So this is again up for feedback from the group. If this doesn't, if the approach to this seems backwards to folks, we want to hear that so that we can refine our work plan, because Catherine and my responsibility as your subcommittee chairs is to facilitate this group and make sure that we are on track for being able to deliver on our deliverables. But if this isn't the most efficient way to do that, then I definitely want to hear and open to that for sure.
I mean, this is a tremendous tool, Erica and Catherine. Thank you for working together to get it assembled. I mean, I took a first peek at it earlier today. I need to sit with it for a little while or revisit it and review it, but I think it's a good roadmap. I don't really have any suggested changes, that's for sure. We're going to be busy over the next few weeks, it seems.
Right. We are.
Yeah.
We are.
And I think that just to put some ease to your mind around that, is I really think this next 2 months is the heaviest lift from the subcommittees. And so if it feels busy and like a lot of work, it kind of should. But I think that if the structures that we're getting in place now to support the fall work come to fruition as we're starting to see it, I think that the burden will get shifted to staff support in the fall, because there's just not going to be a lot of space to do more intermediate sort of templates and policy things coming out of subcommittees. We're going to have to start going right into drafting the climate action plan to meet at December 1st adoption, which means staff support.
Yep.
I'm with Chad. Thanks for putting this together. It lays it out and lets us see what we have to accomplish, which I think we've all been struggling with. So thanks for doing that.
We've been struggling with it.
For me, it both put my mind at ease and overwhelmed me. Like it did a little bit of both. It made it seem manageable because it's lots of little pieces, but there are a lot of little pieces.
A lot of little pieces, and there's a lot of little, there's the potential for us to, as I thought through this, I thought, we as especially as the inventory, the program and policy inventory recommendations come to us, I think that though that will color a lot of the recommendations that come as a result of the CAP recommendations task group. And so they shouldn't be mutually exclusive. They should really feed into the rest of those recommendations. And if one of the task groups under CAP recommendations says what policy and programs are originally said is where we should go with this, and we want to add some more meat on the bones to that recommendation, then that's what should happen. The other thing is I view us in the mid-July timeframe, kind of putting some of these strategies into the buckets that Jane was discussing, because and in this way, this is kind of an organic process where we analyze, we draft the recommendations, we deliberate them, and then we develop, if there's an overarching theme where we say, we need to restore flood corridors throughout the state. that might be an overarching theme, and then there may be sub strategies from the recommendations that feed into that overarching theme.
Just a quick question, if I can. I'm obviously late to the party, 6 months late or more.
Not that late.
Yeah. Is this group just focused on ticking off the boxes in the statute? Like, we need to do what the statute says, or are there opportunities to, address larger issues or related issues? I know it's not a great time to ask this question, so I apologize.
I don't think we're limited to the parameters of the statute. I think we have to make sure that we meet them, but under the general topic of rural resilience and adaptation for climate change, I think if there's, it's not exclusive of other areas.
Okay. That's all.
And I've been kind of keeping a running list of all of these ideas that people bring up that are beyond what we need to do for this July timeframe, that are things that we can talk about and tackle perhaps later, after we get this big chunk done.
Yeah, it's a huge task. When I've gotten these assignments before, I'm just like, here's all the things we need to get done, but here's the future work that we need to address, so maybe a strategy to help.
No, thanks for asking that.
I also think the intent of the legislation was that the subcommittee would be a subcommittee from here until forever. I think we'll see an evolution over time. I think we're, we just have some benchmarks that we have to achieve here in the next few months. Jane?
Just picking up on Chris's comment, I do just want to say that it plays well into the way that climate action plan is drafted, because you'll remember that in the draft, we talk about strategies and recommendations that are sort of ready for prime time. They're ready to go. We're ready to implement them, like that bucket. And then we talk about like future work and what are some key strategies and recommendations that we know are going to be needed to have a resilient and landscape in Vermont. But we still need further work, and I'm trying to flush out what that further work is that we need. So that'll be important, and I think that'll start to really come out as you get these bigger buckets of strategies identified, and then start to think about the inevitable more detail that you have to bring to the work around funding, around what's the goal for 2025. 30, 50, do you want to set those kinds of goals similar to emission statutes, which again, that'll come out when you see the template that's in front of you too. But yeah, the climate action plan is really parsed out of like what's the no regret immediate, like we need to move on strategies, and what's to come later.
So we're just about needing to transition to the CAP strategies template. I think I just want to go through the next couple of meetings in detail, especially with the folks that will have some deliverables for those meetings, and make sure that it's really clear what is needed for those meetings. Does that sound good for everybody? Okay. So under policy and program inventory, present products on tasks 1 and 2. That is the inventory and analysis of current plans, and then the gap identification, especially as it relates to integrating or to supporting GHG emission reductions and building resilience. So Joe, I know you folks have been working on these items. And I think, you know, even if it was actually a more comprehensive set of topics that you folks were planning to present, at least on the first meeting, that's okay too. I just, you know, this is just from what is in the work plan.
Okay, I think we're, you know, in good shape, ready to have a discussion with more people. We'll have one more meeting on Monday, and yeah, I think it'll be good.
Okay. And then the following week, which would be June 25th, would be to present on task 4. And these are a little out of order because of the way that they were in the work plan, but it's to develop the list of threat and hazard impact and impact to overall climate change resilience, and rank in terms of impact and probability. That's actually something that I'd like to be able to continue to tap into Marion's expertise on, because she is the subject matter expert, as well as Stephanie Smith from the hazard mitigation realm. We have this state emergency management plan already has a list of threats and hazards, but it's really just taking a look at those and with the climate change lens, and ranking them in terms of probability times impact equals risk, so that we have a comprehensive standard set of threats and hazards as it relates to climate change in Vermont. So the outcome there would be, this is the list. When we apply climate change to that, this is what we get. Does that make sense to folks? And I think we also need to draw upon what Pat did with us in terms of our exercise of doing the threat identification several weeks ago.
Yeah, there's that. There's the threats that are identified in the act itself, right? I mean, we need to, at a minimum, have those threats included. And then there might be more, like from the National Climate Assessment for the Northeast. There should, maybe there's something we're missing from that. I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I've only looked at it quickly.
Okay. And then the following week would be to present drafts on task 3, which is the resulting recommendations based on the inventory, based on cross-referencing what we know are the main threats and hazards exacerbated by climate change, and to have some recommendations from the task group on, from a program and policy lens, what needs to be improved. Okay, I think silence means consent. And then for the June 11th meeting, we have this task related to critical infrastructure. We just need to be on the same page about what critical infrastructure is. And like I said, there's a lot of definitions out there. The federal government has definitions, but the state of Vermont has a critical infrastructure plan that's housed with our Homeland Security folks. And so I'm gonna ask them to present to us on that, and for us to have a discussion around what is or isn't critical infrastructure as it relates to our recommendations and fortifying critical infrastructure for climate change. And then it would be under CAP recommendations, we would be looking at items 2 and 3, which are fortifying transportation infrastructure and fortifying electrical and communications infrastructure and implementation of storage supported local electrical systems. So that's Joe and whoever else we need to add to that, Joe, for critical transportation. And Mike Burke and Chad Farrell and Ann Margolis for the electrical and communications infrastructure. Do we need to add anybody to those subgroups, those task groups? Everyone gets really quiet when we start talking about the work that needs to get done. Yes,
we do.
Okay.
I just don't know who to add. I need to think through who to add on transportation.
Okay.
I would like some help on that. I mean, especially from the local perspective. You know, maybe actually an RPC transportation planner or two.
I was gonna say, Joe, don't tell Bethany that this came from me, but feel free to contact Bethany and see if she can
Okay.
help work with you on that a bit.
Right.
Oh, and whoever from Central Vermont was working with you on the tool could actually be a good person too. Was that Pam?
Yes.
Yeah, seems like somebody from one of the planning RPCs would be really helpful.
I mean, is there anybody that might directly represent the municipalities? I know there's always VLCT, but I'm thinking somebody actually that works out of town, somebody that's kind of active, you know, with, you know, like some of that, there's road foreman meetings around the state, and sometimes there's kind of leaders of those. But I don't work with them, the RPCs do. So I guess that's something maybe Bethany or one of the other RPCs can help think if we can recruit somebody else to bring that perspective.
Ben and or Stephanie, do you have any suggestions that you could forward to Joe in terms of road commissioners or foremen that are really involved?
You know, I don't know if he's still there, but we used to meet with all the road foremen, and it was organized by the Cornwall road foreman. He was pretty active.
Yeah, that's Stu.
Yes.
I think he's still with us. Yeah. And actually, I'll talk to Stu about that. I mean, he actually may be a good one. And, you know, it's okay to have a couple of V-Trans people just because he does have that tons of local, you know, small rural town experience. And it's okay if he's working for us now. And he's in Vermont Local Roads, which is, you know, all about training and outreach to municipalities. So I'll see if I can bring him on board. Good. Thanks for reminding me of that, Mike.
And Joe, there's also, you might check with Doug, but Brent Smith from the town of Groton's really active in our TAC.
What was his name again?
Brent Smith from Groton.
And I wondered, Joe, if we want to reach out to get the perspective of a larger community, like I'm thinking of Paul Connor in South Burlington. I've worked with him over the years past, and he's super sharp and really well read when it comes to local planning issues. I'd be happy to reach out to him if you want me to.
It's okay. I know him. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so it sounds like folks are solid on what deliverables are coming for the next few weeks. If we want, we can move on from this, and this will be under the Rural Resilience and Adaptation section of the Climate Council website. So anytime there's a revision, it'll go up there, but that's where you'll always be able to find it and download it. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing.
All right, Eric, you want me to take this one?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, no, next we have actually Jane, who's up next
Oh,
to
right.
talk about. I thought I was ready to jump into the vulnerability index, but first we have Jane, who's going to give us an overview of the climate action plan strategies template that she's developed for our committee, where we'll be feeding in our work.
Yeah, and mindful of time, I'm going to walk through this quickly, but it's going to be a lot to digest. And so you have it now in your email, and maybe you've already processed it, maybe you haven't, maybe this will be the enticement that you need to actually look at it more closely. And maybe we can provide some space next week and make any revisions or suggestions at that time based on it. But just some context, we're sort of thinking about multiple scales of templates and trying to think about how we pull together the final climate action plan. So the first and I think most cumbersome template is this policy template that I've shared now with the 3 subcommittees that are responsible primarily for being the ones that are drafting the strategies for the climate action plan. So there are very similar templates now. Yours and Ag and Ecosystems are pretty much identical. And we met this morning with Ag and Ecosystems, and they had one comment that I'll share as I showed to you today with you all on theirs, which would likely carry as a suggestion over into your template as well. And then this was all building off of the template that we had first and foremost created for cross-sector mitigation, knowing that they were going to need to have a place to cumulatively think about how their strategies are adding up to the statutory requirements of emissions reductions. And so this is the first template. It is, as I said, the most cumbersome. The other thing that we'll be thinking about on the same timeline as we're starting to populate this spreadsheet is the idea of how we will communicate your top strategies, your big vision ideas with the public as we move into implementation of the public engagement plan this summer. And so you'll remember that the due date and milestone for strategy development is planned around that. We'll have a public engagement plan the middle of July, July 12th. Right now what's happening is this big sky audience analysis, interviews, roundtables that are all informing the public engagement plan. That plan will be presented to the steering committee that week, as well as all of you at the subcommittee level for you to consider and refine your strategies based on what you learn from that audience analysis from the public engagement plan development. And then, so what these spreadsheets that you'll see right now are not what we'll communicate to the public. There's just so much information in them. They'll be public documents, but we'll want to think about a package that you all will vet and put together in a PowerPoint presentation. And I won't take the time to show that right now, but I sent you, when I shared the agenda, when I realized the agenda was Melissa and I formatted it on behalf of Sue and Erica this morning. When I shared that with you this afternoon, I attached the presentation template that Maine used for their resiliency work to it. And there's similar ones for all the cross-sector sectoral presentations, as well as the Natural and Working Land work group in Maine. And so they're really, I think, great templates. And as you guys said, like jokingly about like taking Maine's section and crossing it out and writing Vermont, I'm really actually going to rob them blind sort of on the slide deck. And so CBI and I are working on taking their slide deck and transforming it into a template for each of you all in the next week or so. So that is forthcoming, but you'll also see then, bye Chris, thanks for being here, what you'll be thinking about as you write and fill out the spreadsheet that I'm about to show you, because that spreadsheet again will help us get to the detail and specificity that we'll need for the climate action plan, but not for how we communicate at this first phase of engagement. So I'm pretty have we shared this at an older version with all of you, or is this your first time seeing it? I can't remember.
I think it's,
So many things floating. This is the first time,
I
Chad?
think this is the first time
Okay.
I've seen it.
So here, the idea here is that there's three main buckets. There's sort of the general descriptions, and then the priority and impact. So the way that you're thinking about the implications of the strategy, and then the key stakeholders and implementation parties. So quickly, the primary task area, I had been thinking about this for all of you around like what we had talked about in the climate action plan draft, like perhaps the primary task area is the way you're going to organize your strategy. So it could be community resilience, infrastructure resilience, and emergency management preparedness. But you guys, I don't think we're there yet. But the idea would be that there would be, or maybe we are, and I just don't know it, see it yet. But there would be a drop-down menu here, and while there may be overlap from those, what your strategy is going to be, it's really identifying that primary bucket that the strategy falls within. This is the big question for you all that I'm also grappling with ag and ecosystems. There are clear and measurable statutory requirements for emissions. So we know that by 2025, we have to cut emissions below 26% below 2005 levels. So we need to know that the strategies and recommendations they're putting forward as ready to go are adding up to that statutory requirement. You guys don't, especially for rural resilience and adaptation, in ag and ecosystems, you could argue they have a measurable goal for them. You know, the law lays out net zero by 2050, and so that's what they're working towards. But if you know much about land use in Vermont, we could do absolutely nothing with forests and agriculture and sequestration. In fact, we could lose quite a bit of forest and still make net zero by 2050. Because if we meet the statutory requirements for emissions reductions, we'll be net zero by 2030 as a state. And so it's really not a heavy lift, right? So I suspect that they'll come up with some more aggressive goals for sequestration, as I would imagine that you will want to think about what a resilient landscape looks like and what's the goal for 2025 and what's the goal beyond that. This is a question for me. Is this something that we're going to think about with this subcommittee, and what the goals would be for the overarching goals and strategies that you're trying to get to? So I'll leave that there as a placeholder for now. But then the strategy is, again, very broad in nature. And then I suspect underneath each strategy, you'll have multiple recommendations or measures that get you there. So for now, we're just thinking about the highest level of strategies. And I think that I might want to play around with language and columns here now that I've been thinking about this more. This might be like objective, and you will have already picked your strategy. But then it's getting at, is it ready to implement? What is the timeline for implementation? Other barriers around implementation. And this is all qualitatively describing it. At some point, you're going to want to think about how you're going to prioritize the work coming out, the recommendations out of the subcommittee. Maybe you won't have as many that you'll just prioritize them all. But like in ag and ecosystems, they developed early on in their subcommittee, they independently developed a multi-criteria assessment tool that they're using to prioritize their strategies coming out of each of their task groups to put together into the overarching strategies and recommendations for the subcommittee. Here, again, I suspect you won't have measurable resiliency and adaptation components, but you might, and I can't actually envision that. You all as the experts might have a better idea. This will be a place where you speak to the guiding principles and equity questions that you'll have in front of you in the next week or so to consider. And then other spots to think about the broader benefits of the policy that you're recommending, as well as the feasibility of actually accomplishing in that. And that gets to do with the cost of it, of course, and as well as for resiliency in particular, the cost of inaction. So like you may see a $500 million price tag, but it may cost the state billions of dollars if we don't actively employ these strategies. And then again, just a lead implementer, if it's the state emergency management department, A&R, a private sector, whatever it might be, and who the other stakeholders are invested in the outcome of that strategy. Again, it's a lot. I'm already seeing some revisions in my mind, but one of the best things I think, like cross-sector, they've just been diving in and starting to use it with their task groups in order to sort of figure out how it works and how it doesn't work. And so I might suggest that you guys aren't quite ready to start filling this out yet, but if you all have suggestions, knowing that you all have this now, I'm more than happy to be the one who receives those suggestions, recognizing that I already have some revisions that I'd like to make, and then share more final sort of run with it, use it, test it out, revised spreadsheet for next Friday with you all. Why don't I stop there and see if anybody has any questions or a suggested approach that's different than mine.
So Jane, that was the 2025 goal, 2030 goal, 2050 goal was what tripped me up a little bit. But I don't think we want to exclude goals for the future, or at least a column to talk about like benchmarks or goals for the future, or talk through like the evolution of a recommendation. I don't think it belongs at the very beginning of the spreadsheet because it just logically doesn't make sense. It probably belongs at the end of the general description portion. And I think this is actually probably a good place for all of our task groups that are developing strategies to start, to just, when you're developing those strategies, to put them and use this in your task groups. And at some point we'll have to like meld them all together in one spreadsheet. but we'll want to have drafts that the task groups can use and start populating that. What do folks think about that comment?
Yeah, I think, like when I get my group together to start coming up with transportation recommendations, I mean, this is really helpful to kind of start laying those out and putting everybody in the same direction. And I think, just whenever I've done anything like this in the past, you never really know how something like this is going to work until you start kind of dealing with some real ideas. And I mean, that's really the same thing happened with the inventory. We're sort of ambitious about what we were going to put in there, and then you end up cutting stuff out that you just don't have the ability to measure or whatever. So yeah, I think this is good. This is helpful.
Nice.
And I appreciate what you just said, Erica, too, around the composition of where we identify goals. And it's funny because I think about the goals at multiple levels. Like I feel like there's this vision for like what a resilient Vermont and looks like, and there's like steps along the way to get there, and that's sort of like that will be the narrative to the component of the climate action plan that speaks to this. But then there's some probably intermediate like goals also when you get into specific programs, like even like the buyout program, thinking about like, what does that look like? Are we gonna like get 10% of the 100% of infrastructure that's in floodways like removed or relocated by 2030, and then our goal is to have all infrastructure that's in the floodways removed by 2050? I don't, I'm throwing out totally pie in the sky things, but something like that, where you have a program or a plan to do something, and you start to measure some kind of measurable amounts towards it. I'll stop sharing now unless anybody has any questions specifically that they want me to navigate to.
So Jane, if you can revise the spreadsheet in that way and then send it back out to the group, I think that'll be something that we'll be referring back to and asking folks to fill out as they're doing their work.
That's great. And I was just going to say this in the chat, but I do encourage, since people have it as is too, if you sit with it and have any additional comments or thoughts in the next, by early next week, I'm more than happy to hear them and accommodate too.
Thanks, Jane. So I see the time, and I'm just hoping everybody has the ability to stay a little bit late if we go over, because I'm super excited to have this next agenda item up to make some progress on one of our deliverables. If you remember at our last meeting, we had this great presentation from Sarah from GMP and from the main person from the Resilience and Adaptation Committee on the vulnerability index that they both worked on. And when the meeting was over, we kind of came to a consensus that our next step would be to grab a consultant and help us figure it out. Well, Mike was kind enough to call me right after the meeting to point out that really the GMP analysis was really close to what Maine had done in terms of a complete assessment of vulnerability. And so he pitched the idea of using the GMP model and then perhaps adding some additional measures of municipal capacity and expanding it statewide. From that conversation, Sarah worked and went ahead and did a statewide analysis, which we sent to everybody in advance of the meeting. And so we have two questions before us today, and I'll turn it over to Mike to talk some more. But one is everybody okay with, instead of hiring a consultant, move forward with using the GMP model as the base? And two, if so, what else, if anything, do we need to add to it? In order to help us answer that question, those questions, I do think it's important for everybody to understand that the Agency of Natural Resources, as Jane has mentioned, is working on an environmental justice vulnerability screening tool. Am I describing it correctly, Jane? Which will be available in the fall. And so to me, that will be one great piece that can be added on to what we've already done, but it doesn't make sense to try to duplicate that if it's already happening at the A&R level. So number one, do we want to move forward with this, working with GMP and refining that model? And number two, if so, what else do we add to it? Mike, anything you want to add before we answer those questions?
Yeah, to give credit where it's due, Sarah actually, when we hung up last week, had the idea that I actually have all the data from everything statewide already, and we could just add it in there. She went and did that. And secondly, just to clarify, Sarah, she's actually working through a DOE grant. So not necessarily 100% GMP employee. She's certainly doing wonderful things for us, but just to clarify that as well. And then the third thing, Sarah does already have some environmental equity data in there, but absolutely, I think, and Sarah, you can clarify this in a minute, we can add any criteria we want into the tool, and it would just crunch more numbers for us and give us different outcomes. So what Sarah said to me is, by the time we get the RFP done, it'll be another 2 or 3 weeks, and Sarah's already got it done pretty much. So that's why we offered it. So we just thought it would save a lot of time. Sarah's getting incredibly good at this, and that's why we landed where we landed. Thanks.
And I'll note that we sometimes go back and forth between vulnerability and resilience. And even in the tools, we call it vulnerability, but the file names are resiliency. So I think it's important to make it clear that we really are focusing on the vulnerability portion of our question with this.
I'm sort of on the fence about it, to be honest with you. And I think there does need to be definitely some more factors added in. I appreciate that we sort of have a time crunch here. And sometimes you just use the best thing that you have available and kind of go forward with that. And I'm also, concerned about who's going to, is GMP offering Sarah to kind of do all the number crunching for us when we start adding in lots of other factors, and, because we really do, there's just work to be done to bring in other things. And so, yeah, those are just, I mean, I can give you some details later on, but that's my initial reaction to it.
Yeah, I would share that sentiment. I'm, I don't know what all is in the A&R tool. Funny, this is the first time I've heard of it. But I'm concerned that the landscape is missing, and biological diversity is missing, and transportation infrastructure is missing. Communities that build in the floodplain are more vulnerable. Communities that build above 2,500 feet are more vulnerable. Communities that have fragmented their forests and develop up to the edges of their streams are more vulnerable. Communities that have undersized municipal infrastructure are more vulnerable. So those are just a few of the metrics that I would look towards. The Global Warming Solutions Act particularly does call out biological diversity. And so I guess I need to brush up on what exactly is included in vulnerability. But to me, this misses those aspects of this work. So I think it's a great start, but there's a lot more to do.
Yeah, and we know that. That's what we're saying. You can add anything you want to the tool, and that's up to this subcommittee, right?
Yeah, I love the idea of using existing data, like not reinventing the wheel, but it does seem, and I love saving money, but we also have a budget for this. So I'd want to make sure that we're utilizing those resources, as efficiently as possible and to get the maximum benefit. And if starting with the GMP model is like a base that we can add on to, seems like that makes a lot of sense.
Well, Mike and Sarah, were you able to get the reliability data from the other DUs, or would that still have to be added in?
That's been added in, and yeah, and I used the data that Corey had sent me, and I did do a slightly different analysis for the outage frequency because we had a little bit different data available from the other DUs than we had for our own service territory. But yes, that's been added in.
And the question in terms of, I don't even know the question in terms of how long you could help maintain this. Sarah, do you have that answer?
No, and I'm also not familiar with the Agency of Natural Resources guide, but I will say that any data that is available at a town level, that's the really tricky part, is just getting at a town level. But if I have that, it's pretty easy to add it on. That type of number crunching can be done pretty quickly.
One other specific, Jens did a great, that was my list, Jens, thanks. But one other issue that just, I read through the Just Transitions, the principles document really quickly, and they kind of have, they have a word cloud that is identifying what all of the, marginalized communities are, which I hate that term, but I'm not sure how else to say it. But, and I did look at the CDC methodology, and they use the term minority, and I'm just wondering, how do those things kind of match up? And it's something we need to be careful about, because if the vulnerability index is supposed to be kind of capturing, be consistent with the principles and everything else that we're trying to do on equity, does it sufficiently do that or not? So that's another question I have, and is that something that we are, capable of evaluating ourselves?
I don't have the answer on that one, but I think we would want to look at how the factors that make up the social vulnerability index, because the data that feeds the social vulnerability index is incorporated into this tool.
Yeah.
And so I think, when as it relates to Just Transitions, they would also point to a lot of the data in the social vulnerability index. The flags, I guess, those indicators. So, Catherine, it sounds like it sounds like we've answered the question that, is is this the tool and methodology that we want to use? And it's really a matter of defining vulnerability as it relates to climate change, identifying the data feeds that would support demonstrating vulnerability, and then, you know, putting them into the tool the way that the other data right now is being shared. I think the question for us is, what equals vulnerability? What equals vulnerable in Vermont as it relates to climate change?
Yeah, we were just offering the tool. We don't care what data gets put in it. That's up to us, right?
You don't
Yeah,
have
you
any
go ahead.
IP requirements on this, Mike? Intellectual property? Nothing confidential?
Yeah, just jump right in.
Thank you. I was just wondering about the SVI. And Erica, what you just said helped me. I think it would be, and maybe the definitions are in there, but some reference. So like when I see that chart and I see how our towns are ranked, first of all, I want to see it as a spreadsheet so I can move them all around. But I also want to know, how did that get in there? And having the backup data, or at least a summary, this is what was used to develop this, would be helpful, even if it was just a bunch of footnotes with references.
Yeah,
I know we
think that
talked about it before, and it sounded fine when we talked about it before.
that summary was, I think, provided in the email that Catherine
Yeah, it
sent
was.
out, along with
Yeah, I
the
think it came
spreadsheet.
from the CDC, didn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, there's really extensive documentation. If you just search CDC Social Vulnerability Index, they can give you like 400 pages of everything you want to know about all the numbers going in there.
I don't want 400 pages.
Thank you.
Yeah, the Vermont Resiliency Index document in the agenda, I thought was really, really helpful for explaining how these numbers were calculated. So
Yeah.
take a look.
I wonder, Catherine, oh, go ahead, Jake.
I was just going to jump in and offer up the Vermont Economic Resiliency Initiative that looked at priority area communities, and I think there were 34 communities that were indexed based on economic activity, infrastructure at risk, and I think that was more gray infrastructure than the green infrastructure that Jens also notes is important in non-residential buildings at risk. So I can plug a link into the chat if that's helpful.
It is. That's a great product for sure. I'm wondering, our timeline for developing a municipal vulnerability index is not as crunched as our timeline is for the climate action plan. Would it be helpful, as just throwing out this as a suggestion, if we developed a task group for the municipal vulnerability index to, you know, now that we've said we love GMP's tool, we love, you know, the help that Sarah can provide, but we need to like actually define what data feeds need to go in it that would delineate vulnerability in Vermont to climate change. But do we need to have like a subgroup that's identified for that can think about that more in depth and come back to this group, or how should we handle that?
That sounds good to me if there's volunteers to do that, right?
We do have a subgroup identified for this task already in the work plan. It's whether that's with this direction, whether that's the right group or not is really the question. And if you're amenable to that, Mike and Sarah, I do think that that's a great approach if the committee agrees.
I think some of the metrics that I mentioned, somebody needs to crunch those numbers, and it's going to take some legwork to do it. And so I was excited about that idea of a consultant to be able to run down some of those leads, and that we could come up with the ideas and they could map it. So, you know, just as one example, figuring out how many houses in the floodplain isn't a huge task, but it takes some doing. And I'd love to have additional capacity to help chase that down. I think we're going to throw out a lot of those metrics if we don't have additional capacity.
And can you write those down and summarize them and send them to Catherine and Jane and I? I think the points that you made, and then that was actually one of my pieces of feedback was it's kind of missing like an exposure piece, like a natural exposure piece, but Jens obviously said it a lot more articulately than I did. And if there's no data that that can be collected for those pieces, then we actually have to have somebody to get it, or we have to decide whether or not it's important enough for the vulnerability index.
I think that's a good point. I don't know if Sarah has the time to research every single data point that we come up with. So yeah, that certainly might point us in a different direction. Again, they would use the same type of tool eventually that Sarah has created, but Sarah, I don't think you have the time to research every single point that we make.
No, I'm very happy to do any existing data integration. Data collection should probably go through a consultant.
Okay, that might be our answer.
There's all the data, there's the processing of it, and then there's even some thinking about the different criteria, like should they all be weighted the same or not be weighted the same, and there's a lot to do to really make I think an index that we all feel good about and can explain, and why is it giving this outcome or whatever, so it's a fair amount of work.
Jane?
Well, I was just especially picking up on what Jens was talking about, science and data.
Oh, we lost you, Jane.
We lost you, Jane.
Lost you.
Jane.
Jane, we can't hear you.
Her mic and her speakers just. Jane.
Jane, we can't hear you.
Can't hear
Your earbuds.
It's always pivotal moments.
Yeah, folks, while she does that, I've got to jump off for a 2:30 here, so I'll see y'all next week.
Well, this was really helpful discussion. I think maybe Catherine, maybe we can touch base offline and we can figure out like a path forward for this item, and along with Jane, and see how we can move it forward.
Yeah, and I think one of the key questions we're really going to need to answer is, because we've done a lot of these sorts of analysis in my work, and we always come down to the question of striving for the perfect and then landing on the acceptable. And so I think it's going to be important for us to think about the data that's available versus the data we want, and how important is the data we want if it's not available. So we're going to have to answer those sorts of questions, and I think having a small group talk through that approach is going to be helpful.
Yeah, and we always have the fallback where if we do find the data and we haven't got the consultant all lined up and ready to go yet, we could just give that data to Sarah and she could crunch it into the existing tool if we're behind on the others.
So thanks, guys. Sorry, Zoom and audio is not my friend generally. I was just going to follow up and let you know that there is this whole work planning component of the Science and Data Subcommittee around data needs. And it has a lot of overlap, and that was identified out of an ag and ecosystem sort of need around a lot of the data sets that Jens was just speaking to. And so I wonder if there's some sort of joint conversation to have maybe with the group of you who you were just speaking about might consider this, and thinking about, because there are the right people around the table there, and it has a lot of overlap with other threads that are playing out in other subcommittees. So I'll bring that up with TJ Poor and Jared, who are, and I think you all know that Jared Duval is now the other co-chair of Science and Data. So Jared and TJ, I'll mention this too.
And it could be that we have a multi-tiered approach to this, that we have a first cut of vulnerability based on what we know that helps feed those immediate actions in the climate action plan. And then we continue to refine and work on this tool as we move forward and some of the A&R work is done in the environmental justice area. So there's lots of different ways we can approach this moving forward, but I think it was really great to have this GMP model as a starting point. And
Yes.
thank you, Sarah and Mike, especially.
If I could jump in with one last thought, if the goal is to direct more place-based investments to the most vulnerable communities, then getting to that list of the more vulnerable communities and maybe even taking it down to, if it's where possible, or thinking about getting to that census tract, or where within a political jurisdiction there's a concentration of vulnerability, if possible, would be a good end.
And I think that one thing that I appreciated about Maine's approach was the way they incorporated some level of municipal capacity. I think their measure wouldn't work for Vermont, but the question of municipal capacity, it really struck me as something super important. You agree, Anya?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think we can't use the measure of having a planner on staff, because then every community in Vermont almost would be highly vulnerable, but some measure like that.
Grand list.
Yeah, I was thinking like you got per capita grand list or something
Yeah.
like that could be a really helpful way of measuring some form of at least financial capacity.
Yeah,
It's true.
Ian, I see you have your hand up.
I do. I hope it's all right for public
jump right
member to chime in here. Just when you spoke to that municipal capacity piece, that's something that's been on the back of my mind as I've been hearing this conversation, and just wanting to think about both the use of data and the limits of data, particularly in the rural context. Like I worked with EAN back in the day when they were trying to do the community energy dashboard for local energy data, and the data just wasn't there.
Nope.
And as a result, I would want to make sure that whatever approaches you all take, particularly in the rural context, don't rely on quantifiable alone, and don't fall into the trap of that if something isn't quantifiable, it's not real. Because I think in terms of the capacity and limitations that exist, especially in the rural context, there just often isn't the social infrastructure there for data to be provided. And so I would hate for, particularly in a subcommittee that's focused almost exclusively on those areas, I think in part because of those realities, I would just want to make sure that in the analysis that you all are doing, that you can, and I wish I had answers right on how to do this. But just,
That was maybe my next question for you.
yeah, right. Because here's my grand plan on how to do this. But just trying to remember that in the context that you all are focused on specifically, often data collection is next to impossible due to lack of local capacity. And that doesn't mean that the problems that could be illuminated by that aren't real. So leaning into, narrative, interview, conversation, or even, very explicitly naming that as, in an absence of social infrastructure, getting data is hard. And so it's hard to know what the needs of rural places are. So metrics and models that only spit out numbers in response to numbers probably won't give as full a picture. And I would just want
It's one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. Add that caution, which I'm sure you guys know, but just would want to make sure it's in the mix.
Thanks, Ian. So I think we have enough for a direction to figure out next steps in moving forward on this work task. And thank you everybody for your feedback, and we'll be in touch.
We move into the public comment portion.
I'd like to offer a comment if I could.
Go right ahead.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Dale Azaria with Conservation Law Foundation. I just wanted to mention that Zach Porter and I sent a letter to this subcommittee with a list of proposals. We sent the same letter to the Agriculture and Ecosystems subcommittee because the proposals really span the work that both of you are doing. And mostly I wanted to confirm that everybody received it. I used the partner.vermont.gov email addresses for those of you who aren't state employees. If you didn't receive it, I'm happy to send it to a different email. If you have any questions, I'd love to discuss them one-on-one or in whatever format is convenient for all of you.
Dale, we can confirm that we received those. It did go to the state email addresses, everybody.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, and thank you for taking time to put those down on a a letter and all in one place. I did look at them and taking some time to digest them.
Absolutely. And, I'll just add that, a lot of the ideas come straight out of existing state plans, state hazard mitigation plan and other plans that many of you have worked on and know in greater depth than we do. But it's just a question of, prioritizing and pulling out the political will to do what we know needs to get done.
Thanks so much. Any other comments from the public? Okay, well, that was a lot to discuss today. And thanks everybody for sticking with us. One of the other things that we need to mention is that, especially as we get into the discussion around the recommendations, we will be extending our meeting timeframes, probably just for like a month or 6 weeks. That just so we have plenty of time and we don't cut ourselves short on the discussion side. So just be aware of that. I don't know that we need it for the next week, but maybe the next time we'll need to extend it to 2 hours. I know 2-hour meetings in the summertime is nice. Any final parting comments from folks?
Just as an FYI, as you start to meet in task groups, that you want to be mindful of quorum. I saw some task groups had a lot of people, and 8 staff don't count towards your quorum, but the subcommittee members do. So if you tip more than 50%, then you have to have a publicly warned meeting.
Okay, gotcha. Oh, I'm gonna take a look at those. Thank you.
Thanks for the reminder, Jane.
Otherwise, it's beautiful out. Go outside.
Yeah.
Hope everyone has a great weekend.
Or be like Catherine, just sit outside the whole time.
Move your office.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Yeah, you too. Bye.